Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome our members and guests to the 2020 conference of Seventh Generation Interfaith. I want to first recognize that this is Indigenous Peoples Day, and I want to pray for the Native Americans in our country and all those vulnerable populations as we continue to be challenged by the pandemic and the economic recession, as well as the physical challenges of climate change that is causing record fires and hurricanes in our country. So for the Indigenous peoples, there's a lot of respect for them today. I want to start out with a little bit of administration for those attendees. You'll be in listen-only mode, but please enter questions for our panelists in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. Chris will also put a link to the conference program in the chat box in case you were not able to open it earlier. That program gives profiles of our panelists as well as profiling our 2020 Mike Crosby Award winner, Sister Ruth Garrett's. Just a short mention of what Seventh Generation Interfaith is. We're a coalition of responsible investors, institutional investors, both faith-based and values-based investors. We have about 36 members in the upper Midwest of the country. Our members practice various socially responsible investing tactics. They integrate their mission with their stewardship of their financial resources. And in doing so, we try to make a change in corporate behavior to have less negative impacts on people and the planet. We've been around for nearly 50 years. My predecessor, Father Mike Crosby, started our coalition in the early 70s and then continued it until he passed away in 2017. Okay, I now want to thank our sponsors of our conference today, particularly our principal sponsor, the Franciscans Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in La Crosse, Wisconsin. But all of our sponsors, we're so appreciative in what you do to further our work. Without your help, we could not do what we do. I also want to thank our panelists today who volunteered their time to provide their perspective on this very relevant and important topic, a just transition to clean energy. They've taken time out of their day, but also expose themselves out there to other perspectives because they want to hear what you're thinking. And so I think that's a great tribute to all those stakeholders. Next, I want to thank our board of directors. We have 4 new board members this morning, earlier this afternoon to take our board to 10. These are volunteer members who help guide the staff. And I also want to thank the conference committee. Sister Carmen Snyder led a group of members who planned this conference earlier. Of course, our earlier plans to meet in person at the Marquette campus was changed somewhere around May when things started to go bad with the pandemic. Finally, I want to thank our staff. I think they do just a tremendous job, and I appreciate everything that they do. Okay, earlier this afternoon, we presented the Father Mike Crosby Award to Sister Ruth Garrett's of the Presentation Sisters, the Blessed Virgin Mary in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Sister Ruth is just a great example of one of our members. She's been working with Father Mike since 2007, I believe, and then carried on with Natalie, Chris, and I. Ruth has just such a pleasant way of engaging companies and giving them such mutual respect that they want to do something back. She gets to the human side, and that's really the way that I think Seventh Generation and the entire ICCR community has been successful for, like I said, 50 years. With that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Chris Cox, who will give you an overview of the program and introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks for your kind words for Natalie and I and for so many others. You know, what we're undertaking today is kind of recognizing that daily science is telling us that if we hope to avert catastrophic climate change, we must act now. This is a scientific fact. In the last 5 years, we've come a long way. June of 2015, Pope Francis published Laudato Si. December of 2015, the Paris Climate Accord was signed. August of 2017, the US delivered formal notice of its intention to leave the Paris Agreement. Along the way, numerous states, cities, and businesses committed to the Paris Agreement, and a growing number of utility companies, including WEC and MGE, are making net zero emissions commitments. In 2019, a then 16-year-old from Sweden dramatically called upon the US and the world to address the climate crisis. Even over the weekend, on Saturday, Pope Francis called upon people of goodwill to make 3 actions, 2 of which have direct bearing on our conference today. The first thing he asked was that we get educated, that we see the link between the environment and human needs. Secondly, and this is the one that we won't get to today, you can't be all things for all people at this time, but we'll get to it. Second was to promote access to safe water and nutrition. And his third was he made a suggestion, he called it, about energy transition. In his words, he called for a gradual replacement, but without delay, of fossil fuels with clean energy sources. We only have a few years. Scientists estimate approximately less than 30. We have a few years, less than 30, to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Not only must this transition be quick and capable of meeting present and future energy needs, it also must be attentive to the impact on the poor, on local populations, as well as on those who work in the energy production sectors. End quote from Pope Francis. For us, we call this a just transition, the subject of our gathering today. We have some marvelous companions in our conversation with deep experience in these issues. So allow me to introduce our moderator, Tom Content, who will then introduce the panelists. Tom is the executive director of the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin. It's the nation's first CUB, Citizens Utility Board, formed in 1979 as a nonprofit, nonpartisan consumer advocate for residential and small business utility customers of Wisconsin. He leads a 3-person staff that advocates for fair and affordable utility rates and reliable utility service and safe utility service. He joined the Citizens Utility Board in 2017 after 30 years of working as a journalist and became interested in energy and what it costs for households while sitting in the back seat, waiting for what seemed like forever during the gas lines of the 70s. He can say more about himself along the way, but with that, Tom, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. And as Chris mentioned, we have a great panel here today with us to help us in our conversation on just transition toward a cleaner energy future. What I wanted to do first was just introduce who's on our panel. You can see their names here, but just a little bit of background. We have Vonda Brunsting, who is with Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and leads the Just Transition Project there. We have Christina Herman with the Interfaith Council on Corporate Responsibility, and she oversees climate and environmental justice issues there. We have Peggy Kelsey from WEC Energy Group, who's EVP and General Counsel, and is the and WEC is the parent company of several electric and natural gas utilities in the Midwest, including here in Wisconsin, We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service. We have Cari and Renlund from Madison Gas and Electric, who's VP and General Counsel, overseeing a lot, many things there in terms of, and working on their transition as well, clean energy transition as well. And then we have Bob Stone with IBEW Local 2150, a group of a union that represents electrical workers, and he's been involved in representing utility workers and has an interesting perspective, along with some of the utilities here today, as members of a global climate change task force here for the state, for looking at policy initiatives for the state of Wisconsin. So I want to just welcome everybody and thank you for being here, and wanted to just get the ball rolling with just a kind of level setting and scene setting on where we are on, and understanding basically the terminology of what we're talking about first. So I thought I'd start with you, Vonda, if you can describe what, from your perspective, the just transition and what it means, and what is it about in your own personal story that brought you to this work?
Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Frank, and I'm really excited to be part of this event today and to hear what the other panelists have to say, and have a conversation with everybody in the audience. So the just transition is a term that was really coined by the labor movement a few decades ago, when the workers wanted a just transition. In New Jersey, the government was forcing a closure of a chemical plant. But the term has now come to have a much broader meaning. It encompasses both the needs of workers and of the community, and the broader trade union movement and international community now refers to this as smoothing the shift towards a more sustainable society and providing hope for the capacity of a green economy to sustain decent jobs and livelihoods for all. So I like that definition because I think it needs to, it speaks to really the need for all of us to think about the transition as a period of time and as a process. And then it also provides the hope for us that we can actually get to a green economy and really address the need for decent jobs and decent livelihoods for everyone. So that's how I see it. What it means to me. So I'm a very proud Midwesterner, a Michigander, actually. I was hoping to be with all of you in person, but alas. So having grown up in Michigan and then starting my organizing career in Chicago, I experienced, I guess, an unjust transition when all of my relatives who worked in the auto industry during the time that I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, these jobs all moved south. So there was no transition, and really people were left with unemployment checks if they were lucky. So I was bitter about it and angry. My family assured me that it was God's will. I didn't think that was enough of an answer. And so 30 years later, here I am, really working on a just transition after having spent a career doing community organizing and union organizing work, and then working in capital stewardship with a lot of the investors who are part of this community that you've gathered here today. And it's our attempt, really the project that I work on, to situate the work on climate that investors have done alongside of and integrated with the social dimension of climate change. And so that to me is where the just transition sits. And what we've tried to do is provide a framework for investors to think about how we can address and provide a pathway for a just transition.
Great, thank you. Well, that, and the across the Midwest, I think that resonates. The kind of the auto industry impacts that Michigan saw. We saw some of that here in Milwaukee with the auto suppliers, such as the Smith Steelworks, which became Tower Automotive and then went out of business in Milwaukee, with many family supporting jobs lost over the years. And so that's certainly good, interesting background and perspective that you bring. So I wanted to turn to Christina and just get a sense from the viewpoint of ICCR and your role there, and what you're working on to ensure a just transition to a lower carbon and clean energy economy.
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Tom. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. it really is a pleasure to see everyone again. It's been a while since we've met in person. So I could say a few things about ICCR and how we're working on just transition. As you know, ICCR members are faith and values-based long-term investors. Many are church pension funds, represent church pension funds, and they're, deeply concerned about the well-being of both communities and the planet, because we understand how the economy is actually rooted in our ecology. So in addition to the sort of really the dignity, the the care for creation, that's the ethic for many of our organizations and institutions. We're concerned about sorry, I'm just thinking about the impact of climate change, and it's really a bit moving. So apologies for this. But so in addition to caring about communities and the planet, our members are also, of course, very concerned about the health of their portfolios, because many of their members rely on these for pension and retirement income. So we're out of time when it comes to the climate crisis, and we have to pursue rapid and drastic action to avert the worst impacts of a warming planet. And we're very aware that this transition to a clean energy economy really cannot take place on the backs of workers and communities. It should not, and it cannot. It cannot because we're going to run into opposition, and we already have. I think 2 years ago, people were pretty stunned by the Yellow Vest movement in France, and the demonstrations in Chile that caused the cancellation of the Congress of Parties for the climate change talks. So they're really important impacts, and the whole transition, while we need to move quickly, it also needs to be handled well. So it's quite a challenge, but it also has the opportunity for being good for people, and Vonda laid a lot of that out.
And how do you work with companies to really push the ball forward?
Right. So we talk to companies as investors, as shareholders directly. In December of last year, ICCR partnered with the Harvard Initiative for Responsible Investment, where Vonda works, to host a roundtable in Cambridge. We had 8 utilities, about 15 investors, representatives from community groups, ratepayer organizations, labor, and NGOs working on energy transition issues. So several of the people on this panel were there. Peggy, Kelsey representing WEC, you, Tom, and of course, Vonda, Brunsting, and Frank Sherman, and Chris Cox from Seventh Generation Interfaith. So we've been working since then on a document laying out investor expectations of energy utilities for a just transition. And we're focused on energy utilities because it's such an important part of the transition. If we can, energy utilities are busy decarbonizing, and how they do it is very important. It's a big part of the carbon sort of footprint in the United States. So, doing it quickly and listening, having that multi-stakeholder process that I think many utilities, are having, but it's a bit, the whole process is a bit of an ad hoc thing. That's what we were hearing from utilities. So we thought, well, let's try to articulate at least what investors are looking for, and let's try to figure out what that is by listening to a lot of different stakeholders. So it's really Harvard that's been driving this process. We've commented a lot, and we're looking forward to seeing that document very soon. So, and we'll use it in our engagements with companies to help craft the questions and help guide the conversation. I think it'll be quite helpful.
Oh, terrific. Okay, well, let's get that utility perspective then. Obviously, shareholders. Their shareholders come in all stripes, but they all want a good return. So there is a balancing act. You've got folks like me as the consumer advocate who wants to keep rates down. You've got you've got shareholders that want a great return. You've got environmental interests, and then you've got your employees. So Peggy, let's start with you. How do you balance everything in getting from here to there toward a cleaner energy, but also as we think about facilitating a just transition?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone. Good to be here. So as you say, it is a balancing act. I only have 3 years under my belt in the utility space, so I'm sort of the utility rookie on this panel. And I'll tell you, I have no appreciation for the complexity of this balancing act that the utilities are facing. So if you think about it, we have a mandate as investor-owned regulated utilities. We exist for a reason, and it is to provide reliable, affordable energy to our customers. All of our customers, we have 4.5 million of them, safely and consistently, and in the face of severe weather and emergencies. So that is our core mandate. That's why we exist. Now layer on top of that our fiduciary duty to shareholders, if we are investor-owned, which of course we are. And as you point out, they expect a return. They have a right to expect a return on their investment. And now layer on top of that the societal calls that we're facing to the utility sector in particular to drive the changes needed to address climate change, all while we preserve the great family supporting jobs that we have. So if you put all of those together, it is definitely something that we're juggling, but we have to do it in the face of our core mandate. So I'll sort of stop there and let Cari Ann jump in from her perspective as well.
I could repeat everything Peggy just said, and so I won't. But to add to that, and again, thank you for having me here today. It's great to see faces. So thank you very much for that opportunity. But I would just add that I think of this core mandate of ours as, electricity is not a luxury in our society anymore. And there's never been a time like during the coronavirus to really emphasize that fact. People need the service that we provide, and we must do so safely and reliably, and I'd argue also sustainably, and also cost effectively, but they have to be balanced. These things must be balanced. And so we do very much strive to achieve all of these 4 goals together, but providing the service is not an option for us. We don't get to just say, okay, well, fossil fuels and human activity are causing this problem. We'll just turn off all the electricity now. Right? So these things are balanced, and it is a very difficult thing to understand when people are really feeling the magnitude of the problem for the planet. So I would just echo what Peggy says.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And as we look toward where we're headed, a lot of what we're talking about is decarbonization goals, and that many utilities have started setting in the last few years. And I just wanted to get a sense for where you are on that in terms of what your companies have done between now and 2030 and 2050. And if you've set a target, do you have any how do you put meat on the bones of, getting from here to there? And we could start with you, Cari Ann, and then go to Peggy.
Okay, MG&E does have both a net carbon zero goal for 2050, and we also have an interim goal for 2030. And that interim goal for 2030 was to reduce our carbon emissions 40% by then. But then also we had some milestone goals in that goal, which was to increase our renewable energy sources in our mix by 30% by 2030. And in even yet another additional step, which is 25% by 2025. And the really good news is we're making really awesome progress on these things already. So as an example, we're already at a 22% reduction of our carbon emissions. And we expect we're going to meet these goals by early 2022. We think that we're going to have met our renewable energy goals already. And that's a really good thing. And we've done that in part in partnership with Peggy's company. We've had the opportunity to partner with WEC on a couple of really awesome big utility scale solar projects in Wisconsin that have really, amplified solar options for our customers here. So we've got, I think, 450 megawatts together that we're doing together and are in progress right now. And MG&E only has 150,000 electric customers. So we're taking a much smaller piece of the pie than WEC is, but still it's a really great opportunity. And I think really important part of the just transition, because these solar facilities will be available for all customers, not just those who could afford to do their own independent solar on their house, for example. So I think these utility scale opportunities are fantastic, and they are happening. So as a part of those energy, that's a real opportunity. We've been able to take advantage of some of these wind and production tax credits that are available for a short period of time. And I would argue that the investor-owned utilities in Wisconsin have done a really good job of aggressively going after those opportunities while they're available. That said, it is time to focus on moving away from our fossil assets, but those assets are indeed still needed right now. We can't just shut off some of those assets right now. The technologies that we need to balance our renewable energy technologies are not yet either commercially available or affordable. And we're working on that. And I think the utilities also are sending very strong market signals to those who are making those technologies and manufacturing them and researching them that we want them and need them. So, but there are opportunities and challenges, I would say.
Terrific. Peggy, how are we doing on your targeting and getting there?
Yeah, so as we announced just recently, we had already met our previous goal of 40% carbon reduction by 2030. We met it 10 years early, as you would expect. Well, that caused us to take a look at both our interim and our longer term goal. And just recently, we announced our new goals, which are 70% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and to be net carbon neutral by 2050. I can't get into specifics about potential trajectory from here to there. Obviously, with 2030 being only 10 years away, you can expect that we will be making meaningful progress in the coming years, and that we will carefully announce what we're doing. And as you know, we don't make these decisions in a vacuum, and you know that particularly well, Tom. I mean, we work with our elected officials, we work with our regulators, we work with our labor unions, we work with our customers and customer advocates, including CUB. We speak to environmental groups, and then we try to determine the right path for us to get where we want to go. On top of that, our system operator, MISO, has a strong voice in all of this, because as you can imagine, we have to maintain grid reliability in the Midwest region. And you have all the utilities in the Midwest region, the electric utilities, coming up with their own goals, which if everybody went like this and tried to achieve their goals, I suspect MISO would have something to say about that. And so one of the challenges you had asked earlier, Tom, about challenges for us, and we had pointed this out when we put out our climate report last year. I'll just hold it up for those of you who haven't seen it. It's called A Pathway to a Cleaner Energy Future. We put it out last year. It was a whole series of scenario planning. And one of the things we pointed out was that with the scenario planning that predicts severe, I shouldn't say severe because it's not a negative, electrification, the Midwest region could turn into a winter peaking region. And that matters significantly to us. And Carrie Ann pointed this out, that if we shut down all of the coal-fired generation, we would be left in a situation where we could not provide electricity, especially not in a winter peaking region. if the prognosticators are correct, we can expect another cold winter this year. So we're going to be testing that theory out again. But that's one of the beauties of the utility scale solar. But on top of that, in order for utility scale solar to be able to address a winter peaking situation, we need to have battery storage. So that's one of our big opportunities for technology, and we are pushing for that. So I'll pause there. And I invite anybody, by the way, who happens to be coming up the lakefront in Wisconsin, if you pass, if you're going between Algoma and Manitowoc and you pass through Two Creeks, you can see that one of those utility scale solar farms that Cari talked about, which we expect to be operational soon. It's a real big solar farm off on the lakeside.
Well, it'll be a visible sign of the clean energy transition, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay, well, let's loop Bob in so he doesn't feel left out. We've got Bob here from the IBEW, and we want to talk about the role of the impact of the transition on employees. And so where do they fit in the transition that's happening? So clearly the economics of energy generation are changing quickly, and there's pressure and public sentiment and investor sentiment pushing toward a carbon-free economy. So Bob, when you talk to your members, what is their view on this transition and toward renewable energy and where they fit?
When you look at my membership and the members that work within the utility industry in the state and across the country, you can take a little snapshot, and they're just like a snapshot of any community or any group of people. There's people that don't believe in climate change, and there's people that are very passionate about it, and everybody in between. When you work in the industry, you understand that baseload generation is what Peggy and Cari were talking about as part of the reliable electricity and the stability of the grid. That's really what it's about. And you don't get that from a solar field yet or a wind farm. And that was some of the technology that needs to advance for us to get there. Coal gasification, all kinds of different things, all kinds of potentials out there that might work. So they look at it as a threat. A lot of them do. They are concerned about what that future looks like. They are not putting their heads in the sand, but you could hear some of the things that we're not able to share right now and some of the comments that were made, and I respect that. I understand that's how it works, but we're going to have to move past that. We're going to all have to put our heads together, labor, corporations, private industry, in order to make this work. And right now there's kind of some hesitancy on that, I feel. And so I was part of the governor's task force because I was invited and happy to do so. But I also think it's important for labor to be at the table. Tom, you and I sit on the board of the Customers First Coalition. I think that's a very valuable entity for us. That's the type of collaborative efforts that it's going to take. So, so the leadership of labor understands where this is going and is part of it. And so we feel that we need to stay engaged and we need to be part of the solution. When you take a coal-fired baseload power plant, 1,000 megawatt plant, and replace it with a 1,000 megawatt wind farm, you're taking somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 plus good paying upper middle class wage jobs, and you're replacing it with 5 for a 1,000 megawatt wind farm. Now, that's not building it, but once it's built, it takes about 5 people to operate that. Right. Maybe a slightly more on the wind turbines. It might be a little bit more with that. But what we're seeing in many areas is the fields aren't being staffed by the utility employees. We Energies uses a contractor for their wind farms, and so that does leave a little bit of insecure feeling in the part of my membership.
So it could be seen as a threat to their livelihood in a way.
Yep, and that's not just their livelihood, because they live in the communities where they work, and it's a threat to the community's tax base. Primary tax a power plant like that can be a very principal contributor to the tax base for the community. So it's very far reaching.
Right. Well, thanks, Bob.
Yep.
And so one thing I just wanted to get a sense for is, it seems like what Bob brought up is something that we can take forward, because it seems like one of the challenges in the past is everybody's in their own, almost in their own silos instead of working together. And so I just want to get a sense from the companies on how do you reach out to the community and all these different stakeholder groups to bring folks together, so that so that it doesn't have to be a win-lose. It can be kind of a transition that actually does work for everybody.
Carrie Ann, you want me to hop in?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, this
Either
one. So, utilities, because of their varying nature, are embedded in the community. We understand that. We understand the importance of our role in the community as a utility. I mean, if you think about it, almost every single person that you walk past in your service territory is a customer of yours, which is an unusual business model. That they're all there living with you, and we ourselves are customers of the utility. And so we have a very robust communications team. We partner that up with our foundations. So we have we have multiple large charitable foundations. In the Milwaukee area, the We Energies Foundation is one of the largest company foundations in the community, and we take that responsibility very seriously. And we do partner that up with our strategic goals and with the communities of need. And we did that, for example, when we closed our Presque Isle power plant in Michigan. We actually made charitable contributions there to some student activities so that we could provide opportunities for young people in that community to pursue different training and education. And so we do try to partner all of these things up as we look forward. We have very strong communication ties, as you might imagine, with the folks that Bob represents, with our union leadership in all 4 of our states. And COVID gave us a really great example of that, where we were on the phone with union leadership multiple times a day, every day, trying to work through the impact of COVID-19 as we tried to continue to deliver on the mandate that we talked about before, and keeping our employees safe, which was paramount to us. So we have very natural lines of communication there, but we are a publicly traded entity. And I understand Bob's point about being frustrated, but for us, we can't willy-nilly make announcements about things that could be material to us. And yes, that is a bit of a barrier to us. We have to be very careful about what we announce, when we announce it, and to whom we announce it. And so we can't be making individual announcements about something that could be material, given that we are publicly traded. So I understand the frustration. That is sort of a bit of a reality. I can assure you, although I'd welcome Bob's comments on this, I know we're going to have some comments later about when we closed down the Pleasant Prairie power plant, but we had a very, very robust communications program in place for that. It actually happened right after I started, so I was able to see it firsthand, and it first and foremost involved our communicating with our employees and figuring out their role in all of this. So that is going to be the first thing that we look at. Is the impact to our employees when we have a major announcement to make. And there's no attempt to hide the ball. We truly are trying to balance everything and make the right decisions for us as we look forward over the next 10 years and the next 30 years as we put our plan together.
Yeah.
So I guess,
and specifically on Pleasant Prairie, that was a coal plant that the WEC shut down in 2018. And there was dialogue that went into that, but yet on the one hand, that a lot of the folks on the consumer advocate and the employee side, how did that process go? I'll start with you, Peggy, and then go to Bob.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, Bob can tell you how he thought it went from his perspective. You know, those kind of announcements are never happy news. When you announce that you're going to retire somebody's place of business. In that case, we had very robust communications protocols that involved people physically being at Pleasant Prairie when we made the announcement, meeting with the employees, going through robust Q&A documents. We made sure that every leader in the company had all of the points they needed so that they could answer the questions that they could. I will say that our goal, which I think we achieved pretty much with respect to that, was to be able to find jobs within the company for anybody who was going to be displaced from Pleasant Prairie to the extent they wanted one. And so that transition was able to happen, particularly between Pleasant Prairie and the Oak Creek campus. It'll be more challenging going forward, as you might imagine. But I think from our point of view, and I'd welcome the feedback from Bob, we tried very hard as quickly as we could to communicate with our employees and to provide them all the information that they needed. Again, with news that nobody wants to hear.
Clearly. And Bob, what's your perspective on Pleasant Prairie and kind of the implications for moving forward?
So as much as maybe some of the people in the audience want to hear a good exchange between me and Peggy, a little confrontation here, I'm not going to be able to provide that because I do think that WEC engaged us, Local 2150, and from what I understand, Local 420. Those were the two local unions, operating engineers and International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. It was a pretty long and tedious negotiation, pretty complicated, trying to take a bunch of different disciplines and figure out how to fairly move them into other areas. One dynamic that goes on, and it's going on at the Oak Creek site right now, is the number of people employed has drastically been reduced from 30 years ago when I worked at the Oak Creek site to today. There are work groups with a quarter of the people in them operating the same 4 units that we're operating. Now, granted, one of the units is not operating very much, but the other 3 are pretty regular. And what that does is it puts a lot of stress on the individuals. It's same 24/7 coverage with a third of the people. You can imagine what that is. And over a long period of time, if we're talking 2028, 2029, that's going to be very wearing on the workers. So that is a dynamic. I don't have an answer to getting around that, in fairness, but that's a dynamic. And that is what we saw at P4. We saw this was the staffing. They weren't replacing people as they left by design because we needed to find places for people to go. But I can honestly say that in that scenario, nobody lost a job or nobody had to take an early out that didn't want to, at least in 2150. That might not be the case for 420. I do know, though, that other plants have been shut down where the corporate entity did not engage, was unwilling to come up with a plan, and people did lose their jobs. And local unions came in and found other places, different companies, whatever, for these very talented individuals. So that's what we want to avoid. Right.
And now I'm not wearing a hat, but I'm going to put on my consumer advocate hat here for a second, just to talk about Pleasant Prairie from the consumer advocate perspective, which is, we've seen rate pressure in Wisconsin over the years where electric rates have gone up faster than inflation and faster than some of the other states in the Midwest. And so one of the challenges that we're looking for as the Citizens Utility Board is a cost-effective clean energy transition. And one of the challenges that we see is that for so long, as a state, Wisconsin and its utilities kept investing in older coal plants and putting more money into them to keep them going, and then basically took what I like to call a hard left toward solar and renewable. And so that's the challenge, is how making sure that it's affordable for everybody. And I'm glad to say that we were able to work with We Energies to negotiate a settlement that will refinance, basically lower the interest rate and refinance and help customers save tens of millions of dollars on some of the lingering costs from the Pleasant Prairie. And then the other community impact that is a concern sometimes in many of these communities is tax base. And Wisconsin has gone through a nuclear plant shutdown that led to some legislation that has helped somewhat with the decline and the impact on the tax base. But that's something that is another thing that needs to be monitored. I wanted to bring in Christina back to the conversation to talk about, these silos and getting people together. So what do you see as the role of partnerships and relationships between community, community labor, and the companies and then the investors to kind of bring this together?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a good question. So, I don't think we see ourselves as the conveners of groups for utilities. But what we have been trying to do is to listen to, develop relationships, particularly with community members and with labor, so we can understand their perspective. I mean, we talk to a lot of companies and we hear that perspective. I think, we all sit in our different, as you say, silos, and we're trying to move out of that and broaden our understanding of what the impacts are. And then we can take that perspective. And sometimes what we're hoping to do is take people along with us into dialogues. We can do that through the roundtables. I think we'd like to have another one. And right now we're focused on trying to build relationships. We're having a series of webinars. We've been doing some place-based work in Boston, which has been really interesting because there's a whole group of advocates up there who are very interested in transitioning, or they're being concerned about issues associated with natural gas, so methane leakage from the pipes, and that's where they started. And now they're looking at the possibilities inherent in the use of geothermal as a source for building, heating, and cooling. And I'd love to ask Peggy and Cari if their respective utilities are looking at that technology at all, because what they've discovered in Boston, and the groups are, there's a lot of academic support up there. Anyway, they're looking and talking with a local utility about some. I think the utility is going to do some pilots on this to look at district level geothermal for heating and cooling. It can also, of course, be used for electricity production. There are a lot of different kinds of geothermal technologies, but it seems that it would be cost effective. I mean, the charge usually is, geothermal is really expensive, but it's a very, it's like a great transition for gas workers because they're actually trained to work with the same kind of pipes that, are used in geothermal projects. So we're quite interested in learning more about that. I think at some point in this conversation, I'd love to get into a discussion about the importance of policy, because that policy ground, the signals that it sends to companies and frankly to end users is incredibly important as it's an important piece of the transition. And the company's role in setting policy or in sort of, talking to policymakers and regulators is another really important issue.
That's a perfect, super. Well, that's a perfect segue because let's just do that. Let's talk policy. So let's start with Vonda. Vonda, when it comes to setting the kind of the global framework for policy, there's the Paris Climate Agreement. And what does it say about the just transition? And then if you could talk about the U.S. exited the Paris Climate Agreement, and what are the implications of that for a just transition?
Yes, so the Paris Agreement does talk about a just transition. It says this is in the preamble to the agreement, the parties to the accord must take into account the imperatives of a just transition in accordance with nationally defined development priorities. And I think that the important part of it really is that preamble. I see it as being influenced tremendously by the work of Pope Francis and the Laudato Si document, which Chris referenced, because it really sort of sets us the task of addressing the needs of the most marginal people. And as Chris talked about, this more recent talk that Pope Francis gave also reiterated, I think, the moral imperative that we have to meet the needs of a just transition, which I think is a great place for the community that's gathered here today to operate, because a lot of us are religious investors, and we take again, to the balancing act that you talked about earlier, the need for a return, but along that with a set of values that we take into the investment arena that I think is unique to this community. So I think that we have a special role to play. But to your point about the U.S. exiting the Paris Accord, yes, I think that we're hoping to go back into it. I know we're not going to talk about politics, but the election is just in front of us. So I think some changes will be made perhaps. But at the same time, I think a lot of states in the US have started to work on this without kind of a federal mandate. But I do think that unlike a lot of issues that investors work on, action on the just transition requires the government to sort of set a playing field, right? The sort of regulatory arena at a federal level, we'd love to have it, but meanwhile, at a state level, you're seeing it happen. Places like where you are in Wisconsin, there's some references. Bob's on a statewide body. There are other commissions and offices that have been set up. In Colorado, there's a state office on the just transition. In Minnesota, there's a lot of collective effort at a state level. So I think that this is a place for us all to weigh in. And again, to the point that's been made, this is complicated. I think Bob said a long and complicated process. This is a long and complicated process. And it means that we're going to have to go into places that we feel less comfortable. And that might be talking to legislators. It may be, in some cases, talking to labor unions. I think we all have different comfort levels with people who aren't part of our community, but it requires us to sort of bridge those gaps and to sort of take those risks and try to step into it. And I think that the policy arena is a perfect example of how we need to sort of push on that front as investors.
Mm-hmm. And so I would throw something out to the whole panel, because when I think about energy efficiency, I think about the low-hanging fruit, the LED bulbs, more widespread use of LED bulbs as the low-hanging fruit. And when I think about the changing economics of energy, in some ways, a lot of the utilities and as a result, the nation has been able to make progress on reducing carbon, absent are being in the Paris Agreement. So given the economics of coal and renewables, are we in a position where we still what do we need as far as clean energy regulations or even a carbon tax? And anybody can jump in. It's a free-for-all.
Well, I'll just start by saying I think we need a whole lot more than we have. I mean, we could have decarbonized a whole lot more had we had better policy in place. And I think there's been so much rolling back of regulations, and a lot of energy has been, forgive the pun, wasted, really, human energy in dealing with all the uncertainty. And, I'll tell you, business and investors like certainty. We like to know what the policy space is. Everybody can adjust to that. I think we need policy on renewable energy. I mean, where are the incentives for ensuring really good jobs in the renewable energy sector? Local hire, prevailing wages, strong health and safety conditions that, unions have fought for decades for. They've built up really good jobs in the energy utility sector. And we don't want to see that gone. We don't want to see it just replaced with, labor that's coming in from another state. So I think, but, they have been up to this point, smaller companies in the renewable energy sector. I think it's really changing, and it's, they're becoming much larger, and it's maturing as a sector. But the incentives need to be put in place from somewhere to ensure those good jobs are, that we don't just have a race to the bottom as we decarbonize.
I would agree with Christina's take on that, and I would go on and say that we need federal funding. We need creative state funding sources. I've heard, and I don't have anything to reference, but I've heard upwards of $1 trillion worth of infrastructure to get to carbon zero. I just was out in Colorado, and I drove out there and back, and some of the most prime areas for wind, nobody lives. And you have to get that electricity from there to the populated areas where the load and the demand is. And those kinds of things are going to take money. And to your point, Tom, as an advocate for keeping those costs down, how are we going to get there? And that's really a challenge.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just jump in myself and talk about buildings, because buildings use 40% of energy, and inefficient buildings waste energy. And so we should be, energy waste is now the equivalent to too much carbon going into the atmosphere and causing more problems. So if there can be more on building codes and things like that, that's kind of things that help people save on energy bills, help save carbon. More of that would be great from our perspective.
So I wonder, is there an incentive needed, and this is really for Peggy and Kelsey, is there an incentive needed in state regulations to incentivize even deeper energy efficiency? Because we can save a huge amount of energy and carbon through energy efficiency, but getting there really, really fast. How are we going to do that? And how would you, because it's actually lost sales for you, really.
I'll let you take that.
If you want to go first.
No, you can go first.
I would just say that, well, Christina, in Wisconsin, we do have, an energy efficiency program called Focus on Energy. And our MG&E customers, as a percentage of the users of Focus on the Focus on Energy program, we have the highest number of customers that use that program than any other investor-owned utility in the state of Wisconsin. Our customers really utilize that program, and we work hard to deploy that program to our customers and to help a whole variety of sectors of our service territory take advantage of those energy efficiency programs. And we are pretty well suited, actually, as a largely mostly urban service territory. It's easier, I think, for our customers to utilize some of those Focus on Energy incentives. We have contractors here who can do the work. We have, it's easy to deploy. We can literally have in-person events with at every community organization's event, in a normal world, right? But we could do this. We could literally have Focus on Energy packages and incentives available for customers to pick up. We could go to a church group and deploy these kinds of resources just easier and less expensive than you can in some of the rural parts of the state of Wisconsin. So I'm not sure if there's state policy needed. I know right now the governor has proposed in his budget, and the Public Service Commission has proposed in their agency request to increase funding for that program, Focus on Energy. Now that program is paid for by customers of the utilities. So it's another balance that must be had. So the incentives do need to be paid for somewhere. But what I can say is our customers use that program very robustly. And so we've tried very hard to protect the funding for that program because, again, our customers really do use it.
Yeah, I saw your note, Chris. I was going to jump in, but I saw your note.
Well, if you want to jump in, Peggy, go ahead. Then I'll start bringing in some questions from the attendees.
Okay, so I would say, and I know there's going to be some eye rolling here, but you saw what the utilities did after the U.S. pulled out of the court. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but we we didn't back away from our climate goals. We doubled down on them. And to your point, Tom, largely driven by economics and us listening to our shareholders and making decisions that make sense for our customers. And so we're very driven by our mandate, and our mandate is wrapped up in the core purpose of the utility, but also within the economic structure. So yes, we are going to be making decisions that make economic sense, not only for us, but for our customers. I will say, with respect to Christina's comment, one of the things that we're also very pleased with is we've rolled out a mobile app at WPS, and we're about to roll out a mobile app for We Energies. As those apps become more and more commonly understood with our customers, we're actually putting data in the hands of our customers so that they can make better decisions. And that's a big part of it, because you can offer them all the energy efficiency tools you want, but if they really don't understand how they're using their electricity, it's hard for them to make those decisions. So I think those mobile apps will help.
Thanks, Peggy. So maybe I'll take on a first question here. It's directed to Peggy and Cari. I'll try and group some of these so I hit some of the different folk, and we'll try and be quick so we can get through them, because there are quite a few already in there. But this one's looking at how you balance investors with different timeframes. There are some who might be day traders, there are some that are short or medium term, some that are longer term, and all seeking strong returns on their investment in your companies. So that sense of balancing, and as you try to continue to build out natural gas as a replacement and retiring coal, might be what some in the short or medium term are looking for, and others looking for bigger changes over the long term.
So I think I can say without fear of being contradicted by our chairman, Mr. Klappa, that you're not going to see us formulate strategy on the basis of the desires of day traders. I think that's fair to say. Generally speaking, we're looking for long-term investors, and long-term investors are looking for us. I mean, utility stocks are generally not the place to go if you're looking for significant volatility and an opportunity to day trade. So I'm very pleased with that. Often dividend paying utility stocks are viewed as bonds with a dividend kicker. And so they're viewed as a very safe space because we're reliable, we have this mandate, and we're going to be around for the long term. So you're going to see us focused, Chris, on long-term investors. And we do, generally speaking, our largest shareholders are very focused on long-term growth with us, and they've experienced long-term growth for years with us already. So that's our focus.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to take a question that's more toward the tail end here and direct it toward Vonda, but also maybe to Christina, which is, appreciating your point about needing to engage legislators and move more into the policy arena. In light of SEC rules that are going to make it more difficult for filing shareholder resolutions, what suggestions do you have for a group like SGI in a time such as this, in terms of being effective?
Did you want to start, Christina? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I have some thoughts.
So I think that it's interesting that we, as investors, often think about the SEC as the place where we get to engage on policy. But I think that that's, there's a whole lot of other ways for us to do it. So I guess that would be my response. I mean, the SEC, it is, it really does mean a lot to investors who are engaged in the shareholder process and filing resolutions and engaging with companies. But there's other roles for us to play. And I think that's part of where we might link arms with others at a state and a federal level, and think about how we do that in trying to really formulate a marketplace that is sort of safe and stable for us as investors to go into. We need to look at things like political contributions, but we also need to weigh in on policy that is sort of going to govern our energy transition and make sure that there's a place at those tables for workers and community. That's a perfectly legitimate role for investors to take on. And I think it's not a place that we necessarily see ourselves. So it's kind of pushing the envelope as we think about new ways we might use the platform that we have as investors in the just transition.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Vonda.
Yeah, and I would just add a bit to that, that we haven't been filing resolutions with WEC or Energy, recently. I mean, we did at one point, but we're engaged in dialogues with all the utilities we're talking to. We don't like the fact that our power as shareholders has been restricted. We think it's the shareholder resolution is actually a really important tool for conveying shareholder concerns with companies that perhaps don't want to talk to us or haven't been sufficiently, we don't feel have been sufficiently responsive. But I think in this space, we have a number of really well-established conversations with companies. And as Vonda pointed out, we're at a different place of doing different kind of work, of bringing in different voices. It's a different process than the standard, engagement that we've done through the resolution process. So, yeah, I just say that. And I think also in terms of what investors have weighed in on policy from time to time when we felt that it's really important. So with federal policy and increasingly at the state level, especially on climate issues, because there's really, frankly, nothing happening at the federal level. I mean, it's all been rolled back. So, it is happening state by state. And because shareholders are so concerned about climate change, investors are very concerned about the impacts on their portfolios and, as I said, the impacts on us, on communities and workers and the economy, the health of the economy. So, we'll continue to talk with legislators or regulators as appropriate to convey our concerns. And we're a business community as well. So we weigh in like everybody else does.
Thanks, Christina. There's another question here looking at how to, since many of the folks on this webinar, on this conference with us are from faith-based institutions. There's a question, how do churches, religious orders play a part in this transition or transformation of our society? I'd throw a couple things in here, but after that, I'm going to ask, I'm going to direct it actually to Bob, but to say that it seems that part of what we can contribute as faith communities is that kind of preaching educational aspect to what we would call in the Catholic realm an integral ecology. There's certainly the kind of work that Tom mentioned about changing light bulbs, the low-hanging fruit, putting solar panels on our rooftops and things like that, but that doesn't achieve the kind of transformation we really seek over the long haul as institutions. We may be able to do more in our role as investors. And I think that the faith community has a particular capacity actually for bringing people together to talk about sticky subjects in society. Bob, would there be some things that you would say that you want to help, that you would need help from faith-based communities to amplify the voice of workers in this and of impacted communities?
Well, I guess I look at it like, as I kind of alluded to earlier, this is going to take a collaborative effort. And certainly the faith-based community needs to be part of that conversation and needs to have their perspectives heard. And without sounding corny, I kind of have had these conversations with people where it kind of reminds me of when President Kennedy challenged us to get to the moon. And when he made that speech, you didn't have the technology in place at the time to actually do it. And over the course of that decade, they developed it and they achieved that goal. Well, the same thing, we got 20 years, 10 years, 30 years. We could debate that all day long, but we need to all get together on the same page and get ourselves there from a technological standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, and everybody needs to be in on this. And that would include the faith-based communities.
Thanks, Bob. Tom, would you add something from the consumer side?
I was just going to say that there are faith-based, in addition to the investor organizations, there are churches that have aligned in different ways on climate. There's an Interfaith Power and Life campaign that's both national and in Wisconsin. My own church, Episcopal Church, espouses creation care and has just joined with that coalition. That's one example. But I think between I want to echo what Bob said, is that to get from here to there, it's really about pursuing what's achievable, but it's also about seeing what's around the corner and mobilizing folks to make that happen, whether it's building more awareness of LEDs, building more awareness of emerging energy storage, because luckily those lithium ion battery prices are coming down just as fast as those solar prices, and that's going to be important for the grid and important for mom and pop consumers too.
Chris, could I just circle back and say, by the way, all those people that go to the different denominational churches, some of them work in power plants, some of them are line mechanics, some of them, so we're all in this,
That's very well said. Very well said. There's a question as well, and maybe I'll direct this initially to Peggy and Cari, that's about environmental expertise on utility boards. So the board of directors of WEC and MGE, do you all have any requirements or expectations of climate or environmental expertise?
So we don't have a requirement that every board member have environmental or climate expertise. What we do have, and if you look at our proxy statement, you'll see it. We have a matrix that we publicize with respect to what we do think are the core capabilities that we need for the WEC Board of Directors, and we are looking for a very diverse and broadly constituted board. And as our chairman likes to say, that the role of the board is to force management to make the case for whatever we do. And so we need to make sure that those folks are engaged. Understanding of the regulatory world, understanding of the environmental components that come with it, understanding of our climate strategy, et cetera. Those are all things that are taken into account, and some of our directors have aspects of that and some don't. But we almost never look for a single issue director, and I don't see us doing that going forward.
Yeah. Cari, if you want to come off mute, it looks like.
There we are. You had muted me, Chris, so I'm sorry.
It wasn't me.
Somebody, but it doesn't matter. But we also, MGE does not have a requirement for any specific particular expertise on our board of any kind, whether it's environmental or an IBEW worker, or a faith-based advocate, for example. We don't, just as Peggy said, we don't look to galvanize the board by one issue board members, but rather also look for a very broad base of experience that then folks who have the experience then to listen to experts who come in from management to give them the expertise that they need to know about this decision or that decision, and they can use their broad base of experience to to oversee those decisions that are being made by management. So very consistent with what Peggy said.
So
Thanks,
could I ask
Cari.
a quick question? I just want to follow up on that. So some companies bring in outside experts. Do you ever do that? Particularly
Yes,
environmental.
all the time. I mean, that happens, that's routine. I mean, we rely on management to bring the expertise to the company. I mean, we have I oversee our environmental and safety division as an example at MGE. It's my largest division of employees. I have environmental experts who work for us. That's all they do. And they inform our strategies and our policies and our goals. And we bring them to talk to the board. We also have brought in climate scientists from the University of Wisconsin in order to give broad overviews of what's going on in the world, both from a policy perspective, but from just a straight up science perspective. This is what the science says, and here's the experts from UW to inform them of that. And so we absolutely use both internal and external experts to help our board in their oversight roles.
Same here.
I think we're coming up on toward the upper last quarter of the hour. So maybe Tom, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks so much. Those are a ton of great questions from the panel, and it's hard to get from the audience, and so it's hard to get to everything. But I wanted to have a chance for each of our participants to have some closing thoughts on, what's the biggest challenge you see on affecting a just transition, and if that's not the question you want, I want you to say what's the biggest challenge you see, or what's the biggest takeaway you want our audience to have from this. And I'll start with you, Bob.
Well, I'll be quick. I think the biggest challenge, as I stated before, is the fact that I don't believe there's the technology in place today to get us there. And we really need to work on that. And that could be an impetus to jobs, and some of the transitioning could go into that area of work, and people could perhaps find some employment there. That would be a bonus. Plus, it's necessary to get there. Biggest takeaway, I do believe there's going to have to be some kind of a third-party oversight, a referee, if you will. Is that the Public Service Commission? Does the Public Service Commission put together some kind of energy advisory panel? That would be my preference. Utilities leadership, labor leadership, technical colleges, community service or community leaders, faith-based leaders, all entity to oversee this, to keep it, to play referee, and to keep pushing and get us there.
Super, well, thanks. And let's just keep it with Wisconsin first and then go national. So I'll come to you, Peggy, next, and then get your perspective.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I think the key takeaway for me in particular is just we need to do more to make sure that folks understand the complexity associated with that balance that the utilities have and what our core mandate is, because often we are just looked at as emitters of carbon and they shut it down, and they don't understand what our core mandate is. And they also don't understand that there has to be an answer to the question, who pays for that? And Tom, as you know, that's often the role you all play, is to try to assist in answering that. I will say, as many of you know, our original 2050 goal was 80% carbon reduction. And I remember well when I was at the program at Harvard, and I remember him well because his name was Eli, and I can't remember his last name, and I can't remember where Eli's from, but I loved him because he was just very engaging. And he came right up to me and he said, Peggy, okay, 80%, I get it. We like 80%, but you gotta get to carbon neutral. You have to go there. And I said, Eli, do you know how to get there? And he said, no, but that's not important. The goal is important. And it was just a great dialogue with him. And as you saw, we actually did that. Now we went out, we came back, and we're a very conservative, Midwestern company. And normally if we're going to put our name on a goal, God darn it all, we should know how to get there. And especially a goal that's a 2050 goal. I mean, I'm going to be long retired. And somebody else is going to have to deal with that. So you don't find companies generally setting 2050 goals. And in this case, you see all of us getting together, and we said, all right, we're going to stick our necks out there. We don't know any better now than we did a year ago, exactly how we're going to get there, to Bob's point. But we do know that we have to get there within the core of our mandate, and we have to do it throughout the scenario planning that is trying to guide us in making decisions, that tells us what's going to happen with electrification and the like, because supply and demand are both changing, and we have to be going through our scenario planning as a result. I will say though, before I drop off, I really appreciate always talking to the folks who are focused on the just transition, because there's one group that really does want to hear all the voices and wants to get us all together, it is you all. And that is, it's very refreshing for me. It's educational for me, but I hope it also gives us as utilities the opportunity to educate you about the role we play and the balancing act we have to undertake.
Super. Well, thank you so much. And that is one of those balancing acts of utility commissions are used to doing safe, reliable, and affordable. And now they're adding this environmentally responsible as kind of their fourth thing. And in the wonky world of utility regulation, that's an evolution and not a revolution. So Cari Ann, what would be some of your takeaway?
Well, I got a couple of things. One is, in addition to some of the challenges that have already been identified here, another of the challenges that I see is the utility industry has made, that we've not made all the strides we need to make. I'm not saying that at all, but gratefully we have made a lot of strides, and we made strides despite a lack of robust federal policy for a long time. And part of that is because of the communications that we do engage with folks like you, with our community, with our, with Bob, with our employees, etc. And those communications work. Those efforts are really valuable, and we do appreciate them. And investors in particular have had a huge role in this over the many companies over the last many years. And they can take some credit for this. And I think that that's important. So I'll give you those kudos, first of all. But then another of the challenges that I see is that we are making progress, and we will continue working with you to make that progress, but there are other industries and other things that need to be done to tackle carbon. It is not just the utility industry, and indeed now we see transportation leading the nation as a carbon source. We see agriculture, we see buildings, we see other places that really need to make some strides as well. There's a lot of individual choice in carbon decisions, right? And there are things that people can do in their daily lives that can make a difference. And I think we could do a better job of educating folks on those kinds of, and helping people make those kinds of choices too, because this all has to be done together. And so again, that is a challenge, but an opportunity. And that's one of the things I think we could really do better at, and hopefully can continue to do in conversations like this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Cari Ann. And Vonda, and I'll go Vonda, and then Christina, you jump in right after Vonda so we can keep on time here, or close to.
All right, well, I'll try to be brief. So the group that I wanted to bring in, I think another challenge that we have to face is from the environmental justice community. So the just transition has been picked up by frontline communities all over the US, groups like the Climate Justice Alliance. There's lots of local groups, really communities of color, poor communities that have borne the brunt of the extractive side of our energy economy, and who are really stepping up to say, what about us, right? And I think that given the moment that we're in, both with the pandemic as well as with the movement for Black Lives, people are starting to understand that, the normal of what we experienced before isn't appropriate for what we need to build next, right? And so last week, some of you may have participated in the ICCR event that we did on the just transition, where I had a chance to speak with an environmental justice leader, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, who's based in New York, but also works nationally with some of these organizations. And she said something that really struck me in our conversation, where she said, we need to honor the brilliance of the collective. And I thought, that's, how do we do that? Because that to me is the challenge and the opportunity that we've talked about on this panel, and that the group of 100 of us on the Zoom today can think about, but that's my big takeaway. How do we honor the brilliance of the collective? Because the collective is more brilliant than those of us as individuals, or even as individual organizations. And so that's what I would like to do with this group going forward, as well as through the work I'm doing with ICCR.
Well said. Christina.
Wow. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you very much for bringing in, Vonda, that perspective, because it's incredibly important. I think one of the things that concerns me most, I mean, I know we're all concerned about the divisions in the country, and I think, honestly, confusion about climate change. It's not something you believe in. It's not a thing to be believed in. It is a thing. It is reality. But there are people who don't think that that's the case. And I think one of our big challenges is overcoming that and getting past the void. You know, there are economic interests in this country that are pushing very hard to slow down the transition. That is a big problem. And I think what we can do, both as churches and as individuals and as organizations, is to try to pull together as many disparate voices as possible and pull together, as we have in the roundtable, and go well beyond that to have that conversation about how we can create a healthy, truly sustainable economy, one that's going to work for people, and then hear from each other what the issues are. I would love to have workers showing up at the board to talk to, to bring that perspective directly to the board. I think that's really important. I think we have to do it. We can't do business as usual. I think we're going to have to get out of our comfort zones, as Vonda said last week, and really have conversations that are difficult, but also, I think, work with one another and support one another as we move toward a very different kind of economy, because it can't be business as usual. So thanks very much. I'm just very glad to be here and to hear all these perspectives. And I'm really looking forward to talking to all of you again, Peggy and Cari, especially in our company dialogues.
Thank you so much. We've had a great group here of great national and local Midwestern perspectives on a variety of these things, a variety of these topics that are pushing us forward. I just can't say enough about how pleased I am with your takeaways at the end there. That was a 5 strong endings. So I'm gonna wrap up the panel and hand it over to Chris.
Well, and thank you so much. This has really been a wonderful time to be together. I've put into the chat a link for you to be able to complete an evaluation. We'd be really grateful for those who have joined us through this hour and a half to give us some feedback, which helps us plan our upcoming, continue to deepen the work that we do as Seventh Generation Interfaith. Need to thank especially our panelists, to thank Tom, who moderated us, to thank Bob and Cari Ann and Peggy and Vonda and Christina. We couldn't have done this without your insight, without your experience today. Also want to thank all of our sponsors that you help us and be able to do this work that we do with our various members. The final word has to be then thank you. And thanks for your time this evening. And we look forward to being with you, hopefully in person next year, when I can invite you all out into the reception area outside. But meanwhile, we'll be able to close here and come back together sometime soon. Thanks much.
Everyone.
Thanks very much.